Just a note here to say I was planning to use clips from the film during the video, but I'd rather not take the risk with the copyright claims. And this is not a plot summary, this is an analysis of the substance based on the id, ego, superego, and other elements of psychoanalysis. Basically, I'm going to assume that you've seen the film if you carry on watching the video, so if you haven't seen the film, watch it first and then come back. Thank you. When I saw The Substance the very night it released, it was undeniably the biggest surprise of the year for me. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley both give career-defining performances as Elizabeth and Sue. As much as the film split chapters, and many of the movie's critics would have you believe, Sue is almost an entirely different person to Elizabeth, and that the birthing scene is literal as much as metaphorical. This is mostly from a general audience member's perspective that I've heard this. This could reflect something deeper for the audience members, as the way the film presents its metaphors to us is asking the audience members not only to challenge the conventions of Hollywood and to question their own concept of feminism, but also to question themselves and their own understanding of their own deep desires, who they want to be, and how they conform to other people. In the end of Evangelion and the finale of the show, Shinji Ikari reaches a point of self-actualization, as in, through his own mind, we see a turning point in his psyche, to the point he discovers his own self-worth and values not only himself, but the relationships all around him. As crazy as it sounds, this is quite comparable to the end of The Substance. The reason I'm bringing this up is to link psychoanalysis, along with some terminology introduced by Freud, which had clear influence on The Substance and some of the scenes in the film. This isn't to say The Substance couldn't be interpreted as a feminist text, a middle finger to the corrupt execs in the film industry at Hollywood, or just a Cronenberg gore fest and a blast of a great film. The Hedgehog's dilemma is a confrontation Elizabeth faces all throughout the film, but with no one more so than Fred, who proclaims during his first scene, "You're still the most beautiful girl in the world." This sets two issues for Elizabeth. The first is that still implies she's keeping herself together despite her age, something she's currently struggling with after losing her TV spot as a fitness instructor from the shrimp-devouring executive Harvey. This also means she will still feel the weight of the expectation that Fred has of her, considering the first thing he can express is the image he has of her in his mind. During a later scene, my favourite in the movie, we see Elizabeth doing her makeup over and over, trying to perfect her own image, until she's violently pulling at her skin, frustrated she can't look like Sue, who fits the conventions of a swiftly changing Hollywood. This is the point for Elizabeth where she faces the Hedgehog's dilemma. Another popular phrase for this is fight or flight. In this case, Elizabeth can try to ignore the issues and the anxiety she's facing, go on her date with Fred, and try to have a good time and enjoy herself, which would be the fight approach, or the flight would be to ignore his texts and calls, sit down and watch TV, and not go on the date because the anxiety is too much to face. In this case, she chooses flight to avoid going out and having that potential confrontation for herself and her own ego. The Hedgehog's dilemma is the same principle, but used more so as a metaphor, with the idea of a hedgehog being prickly, so it retracts into a ball, meaning nothing can get inside. So in this case, her relationship with Fred is impacted because she's withdrawn and the spikes are out, so if Fred tried to get close, he just can't because Elizabeth isn't letting him in. Whereas if the hedgehog was out, then at that point, they could build a bond and have a relationship, but she's choosing to retract that to save herself from the pain of the hurt and rejection. In terms of the other characters Elizabeth encounters, her response to the dilemma is logical to withdraw. But let's explore another psychoanalytic theory I believe The Substance applies, through its three-act structure. I believe the three-act structure of the film reflects more than a turning point in the narrative, but can also be interpreted as the id, ego, and superego in psychoanalysis. For anyone not used to these terms, what it boils down to are the three parts of our brain that process our aspirations, dreams, and deeper desires, but also ground them in reality, according to Freud. For example, as with Elizabeth's case, we may have a deeper desire for intimacy, close friends, family, and our relationships to grow in everyday life. But in the grounds of reality, there's only so much communication and common understanding possible between people. The id is the deeper desire for intimacy. The superego applies the social constructs and considers what is realistic, and the ego acts as a negotiator, balancing between both. In this one scenario for Elizabeth, the id is the deep desire of her to go on the date with Fred and just enjoy herself and have a good time. She may also deep down wish that Fred would accept her appearance no matter what, which is the case, but there's part of her that is causing anxiety and making her believe that's not the case and that she has to look at her best, otherwise he won't accept her. And that would be the superego coming in and saying you have to look at your best, you have to fit these societal norms, You'd fit the image that you've made yourself, otherwise you won't be accepted by the external society, and believing that the image won't match his expectations will lead to a form of rejection. In the scene where she has the meltdown, pulling her face apart, is the ego coming in and not able to deal with these two conflicting parts of her mind, and therefore causing this massive distress to the point where she can't function and the fight or flight kicks in because of those anxieties. Reflecting this theory across the whole film, we can see that Sue reflects the superego, the part of the brain that ensures we stay to societal expectations and don't go beyond unconventional boundaries in order to please ourselves over the perception of others. So this is how we adapt our body image to fit in or go above and beyond to please other people even when it causes us pain. By the film's own description, the substance creates the best version of you. But who is that according to? Sue's form is the epitome of this aspect to Elizabeth's overall personality. She could have gone anywhere or done anything else after taking the substance, becoming the younger, better version of herself, but she chose to go back to the same job in her new skin because her superego and deeper persona are relying on the perception of Harvey and her dance crew for validation in the first place. Internally, she has not confronted that part of herself that relies on the external people for validation, and therefore she can't really move on from the emotional scars that the rejection of losing her job caused in the first place. As Sue, the Pump It Up workout gives her a euphoric moment to feel like the object of desire. The director enhances his theme by applying the male gaze to her workout. For the first time in a long time, Elizabeth is the point of focus in her new form. While this is a satisfying moment for Sue, Elizabeth as the ego will start to struggle to match the bar she set herself in everyday life, repressing her own deeper desires. It's so much like when Shrek takes the happily ever after potion in Shrek 2. For Elizabeth, while she and Sue are rotating weeks taking the substance, as the ego, Elizabeth is struggling to come to terms with the fact that she's repressing a deeper part of herself, while Sue's becoming a star and seemingly able to bend and fold to all the societal requirements. Elizabeth is angry at Sue for being able to impress others, and annoyed at herself in her current form for failing to live up to those expectations in the first place. By the time we reach the halfway point, Sue has completely taken the wheel, going over the amount of days she can stay in control of her body without Elizabeth feeling the side effects, with the body wrinkling away beyond her years. The film coins this term as the balance must be respected. In the context of the film, this means the balance between Elizabeth and Sue, taking the wheel and staying in the right body for the 7-day period. But I also believe this to mean the balance between the id, ego, and superego. This reaches a boiling point with Sue as the superego, as when she arrives on a talk show, she talks about Elizabeth, drops disses about her, at which point they both start to punish each other and play even more mind games. Throughout the whole movie, you're always being reminded they are one. What is really happening is Sue as the superego is punishing Elizabeth for her social failures. The fact that she's unable to match the beauty standards set by Hollywood, that she's weak and unable to repress her own emotions entirely to benefit others in the way that Sue clearly can, because the substance created a version of Elizabeth that is able to perform to match all of those expectations and tick every single box and not feel at all fazed by any struggles. Sue chooses to stay in control for longer than the substance allows for. This has a dire effect for Elizabeth, who ages rapidly to the point of losing her hair and looking elderly. Sue chose to stay in control for this longer period of time, which would have bad consequences for both characters. Eventually, Elizabeth decides to terminate Sue. In the middle of injecting Sue with her termination fluid, Elizabeth stops, unable to let go of this part of herself that relies on validation so much. Sue wakes up, and for the first time both are conscious and able to interact. Sue is furious Elizabeth tried to kill her, but it's more than that. She resents what Elizabeth represents, a part of herself so insecure, needy and ugly. Sue expresses all this rage in an instant by beating Elizabeth around her apartment, smashing her face against glass and ultimately killing her. The superego now exists without id or ego to present a balance of both behaviours and form a complete identity. I had a few ideas on what happened to Sue during the scene in which she struggled to function. The scene where her teeth fall apart reflects her worst fears, becoming what the world is repulsed by, failing to live up to the image in the way Elizabeth did, whom she scolded for being so weak. And bear in mind, this is still Elizabeth herself acting out. It could be that killing Elizabeth meant Sue gained more of the condition of the id and ego, but it seems more unlikely that without the ego, she has no sense of self and therefore can't even function at a basic capacity. In a panic, she tries the substance on herself, despite being created by it. This gives us a deeper insight into Elizabeth's addictive personality, At every turn, she's been able to let go of the hold it has over her, demonstrating there's no extreme she won't go to maintain this image, even if it kills her completely. This causes another birthing scene, creating Monstro Eliza Sue, a giant blob that is a blend of Sue, Elizabeth, and something else entirely. During my first few moments watching this scene, all I could ask myself was, who's behind the wheel now? It's Margaret Qualley, who is in the prosthetics as the creature, so you could assume Sue is still the dominant personality. But Elizabeth's face is stitched on the back of the creature, and every part of the costume reflects something different. It's safe to assume, for now at least, that Monstro is a blend of everything, the id, ego, and superego all splashed together. She stares in the mirror. At least compared to the scene when Sue's teeth fall out, there's no sense of panic or fear in the looks and expectation. She seems at least somewhat happy to embrace her current form. She gets ready to go out and perform on the New Year's Eve show, piercing her skin to force an earring on to fit in her flesh, and putting a picture of Elizabeth over her face with a smile drawn on, and trying on a dress that she rips through, being much too small for the creature to fit. After all the struggle between Sue and Elizabeth and the expectations they face, with this creature, all that anxiety is gone. In a sense of societal expectations, this is the worst Elizabeth has looked, but it's the first time she's ever looked in the mirror and felt a sense of genuine confidence facing the outside world, with no sense of repression or enhancers to hide behind. At this point, I really began to believe that Monstro represents the id, our deeper primary desires to embrace and have acceptance of who we are, not who we're trying to be or face the external factors or societal judgments. Nothing stops Elizabeth from just feeling good in herself for once, and the next scene continues to validate this theory. Heading back to the New Year's Eve show, upon arrival on stage, the audience is repulsed by Monstro, so much the crowd can't even hear her speaking over their own chant. She's claiming it's still me. She's pushed onto the floor, crying, and in the spotlight exclaims once again, it's me. Much like when Elizabeth is trying to revive Sue, claiming they're going to love you, Elizabeth's talking to herself directly as much as the audience. In this moment, she's validating her own desires in their purest form above all else. However she chooses to present herself, she wants the autonomy to choose without pressures of conformity, without her superego adding to all those fears and manifesting to a version of herself like Sue, who is ultimately a superficial being who lacks the conscious decision-making if there's no one around her to bounce off of and try to impress. As mentioned, Monstro represents the id, but we can still observe Elizabeth's presence throughout the scene as the ego, who has suspended all sense of the superego and is focusing on what she can do for herself to find a sense of happiness in this mess. This is the point she embraces those deepest feelings, her self-actualization. On top of this very raw pain, the rejection Elizabeth has faced throughout the movie has reached the boiling point, and without the superego repressing the intensity of those expectations, the id, Monstro, is free to express the rage and upset from all this rejection. This is when the gore scene kicks in. Monstro is delivering all of the contained pain and hurt Elizabeth gave herself because of others, and unleashing it returned as a bloody splatter. After the scene, Monstro escapes, roams the streets of LA, weakened from the bloodbath. After collapsing, all that remains of Elizabeth is the piece of her face merged with the creature, which crawls out to her faded out, scratched and damaged Hollywood star. She's smiling, looking up at the sky, even though this is a brutal death scene. The sense of peace and a reconciliation she finds within herself by embracing her id before dissolving away into the concrete slab is oddly beautiful to watch. In the end, it doesn't even matter. Most of us face fears of rejection. Many of us will never go through life without hearing someone say you can or you can't based on looking a certain way or because of so and so. If not from our parents, it's in this digital age where we are sold that above all else, image is what matters most. It's very easy to lose yourself in the way Elizabeth did, to the expectations of others, diluting your own waters because you want to fit in above all else. On top of the meaning for women, the substance proclaims to every viewer that it's worth listening to the id, your inner voice, those internal desires, whatever that means to you. Maybe it's just being kinder to yourself, the inner child, the parts of yourself you're abandoning, because looking back on that can hurt. But as the smile at the end shows, it can be incredibly rewarding to know yourself better. I haven't felt sick watching a movie since I was a kid and I saw Gollum transform in Return of the King, and ever since I saw the substance on a random night out in London, I had to ask myself, what did this do differently that really hit a nerve for me? It's clear, the movie is stylized to an absurdist degree, but at every chance it gets, the plot beats and emotional beats are rippling off of each other. At a certain point for me, the movie stopped feeling otherworldly and started feeling more of an existential crisis. I understand it's not for everyone, but for me, it was the most profound horror experience I've had this whole decade. If you've watched all this way, I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll take any requests for videos as well, because I am blank now in terms of what to do next. What I would like to do is shift more towards video games, so I can use actual footage from those. And I'm happy to do some free flow discussions, as I've done one recently. However, this video does in the God Emperor algorithm. It's something I did out of passion because I love The Substance so much. It was a film that really resonated for me. I've watched countless videos on it myself, and I've read a lot of articles online. There was one I wanted to highlight as well, from the Northeastern Illinois University's Independent, and it was by Jasmine Rodriguez. She mentioned different theories of mine, but in the same vein, with Sue as the id. So the idea that she was acting solely on the desire of being sexualized, being a part of that gaze, and fitting to all those standard gender stereotypes. So it was an interesting spin on how I saw the film. And I'll leave the article link below because it's definitely worth a read, and it's all subjective really. It's just something that I found really interesting to go through and read myself after the perspective I built and the analysis I was about to construct. At the time of recording, it's about a week to go until the Oscars, and I'm really hoping Demi Moore wins the Oscar because it was truly deserved for such a great performance. Not the other nominees aren't also worthy, but it's the fact that after such a long time being rejected by Hollywood, aging, going through that struggle, to deliver such a raw and powerful and emotional film is something that I feel deserves the credit. It's not just because I'm a big fan of Ghost and Hunchback of Notre Dame, though that is also true. Besides that, thanks for watching. Don't touch that dial now, we're just getting started.